From the Cold Formed Steel Buildings Association, this is Cold Formed Buildings Made Easy with your hosts, John Cosper and Lauren Toole.
Hello and welcome to Cold Formed Buildings Made Easy. I'm John Cosper. With me is my co-host, Lauren Toole. Lauren, how are you doing?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing well. We've got a very exciting guest with us this month. Quicken Steel has been part of the Cold Formed family for quite a while, and they're starting to grow across the country. They just opened a new plant in Texas, which is very exciting. And with us is Hunter Jeffcoat from Quicken. What's your title and what's your role when it comes to the Cold Form, Hunter?
Sales manager, but really whatever it takes. So I've done a little bit of everything at Quicken, including taking out the trash. So
you know what? That's leadership right there. That's
exactly
true.
Right.
That's true. That takes me back to my college days and my boss in my college days who took his turn scrubbing the bathrooms because it was a startup. That's true leadership. So, well, Hunter, tell us about your background and how you came to Quicken Steel.
Typically when people ask this question, and this actually comes up a lot because I'm in my 30s, they expect a progression of 10, 15 years through management inside of an organization or inside of steel. And, my story is a little bit unorthodox for steel. For the last 15 years, I've built businesses mostly for myself. And as of 4 or 5 years ago, I've been building inside of Quicken. So my skill set outside of Quicken was honed in on turning businesses from what I would consider to be almost like a seed stage business in the VC or startup world to kind of a Series A, where you're doing the marketing and the revenue ramp up and the structuring and all that good stuff, minus the outside funds, right? So I've always bootstrapped and built things from scratch. And I tell people developing business like this is a lot like playing golf, right? So if you're a golfer, you know that if you flop out on the course, it's pretty obvious. You don't have a team to prop you up. And if you don't present well or you don't perform, everybody knows it. This kind of forced me to develop in a lot of areas, from how I manage finances to how I manage people, and ultimately what we have to do to win, because there was no backup. That translated into steel when I started at Quicken, which Quicken is local to me, right? So I was a little bit familiar about it, but when I was first brought inside of Quicken, in the best way possible, it felt like a startup. And I don't mean that in a negative way, because at the time, Quicken was only a few years old, but it was already thriving. It was already pushing great volume. Jonathan Sherrill at the time, who had started the company, had really ramped it up to being an established manufacturer. It wasn't a hobby, a shop, or anything like that. But I really felt that I could step in to the opportunity and align with the culture that was in place. And we'll hit on that a little bit later, but ultimately just add value. So I joined Quicken. I was employee number 62, I believe, and just jumped in head first with just a really good group of people. And then in 2022, Quicken had been ramped up to Inc. 5000's fifth fastest growing manufacturing company in the U.S. We had almost doubled year over year in revenue from the start. Most of those original team members that I had on the cold form side and even on the component side, ironically now are running cold form programs of their own. You've had John Wilson on the podcast. I'm sure you'll have some of the others on the podcast, but just a really solid group of people that I was fortunate to be around. They really just hyper accelerated my knowledge in the industry and in steel. I have familiarity with it. I am a hands-on guy, even though I mentioned kind of techie stuff, but I didn't need as much honing in on the business side. I just needed honing in on the steel side.
When did you first discover cold form?
About 5 years ago through Quicken. Again, I had a little bit of familiarity around the red iron side and around just steel in general. But I learned the nuances of cold form through the team here at Quicken, through just my professional curiosity and just by doing. It's kind of funny because I tie it to the 10,000 hour rule that you hear about in Outliers through Malcolm Gladwell, right? Where it's just 10,000 hours of doing ultimately leads to expertise in a certain area. And, there's argument that that's not applicable in different businesses or different arenas. But in steel, I find that if you're truly plugged in and you're curious and you're developing for a 4 to 5 year period, you can really absorb a lot. And because Quicken at the time was lean, and we still run lean, compared to a lot of your legacy manufacturers, we were all tasked with 3, 4, 5 different jobs. So we didn't just have to know how to sell it. We knew what actually was built into the price. We knew a lot of the buy side factors. we just ended up picking up a lot. And that's kind of my messaging to someone new to the industry to also, right? Because anytime a legacy manufacturer is hiring, they're typically looking for somebody with a lot of experience in the industry. But my message to anyone who has salesmanship skills or is just smart and capable, you can pick this up. You can grow with it. The opportunity to grow alongside Cold Form right now is out there, and it continues to present itself.
So what was it about cold form that made you want to focus so much of your efforts at Quicken on it? It really does seem it has become a major point of emphasis with the company.
It definitely is. So for Quicken, Cold Form is not a bolt-on, or it's not an afterthought. It's what we consider a main business segment here, one of the main three, maybe four, depending on how you categorize it. But one just being the growth potential. I mentioned earlier I was kind of drawn to startups and creating something from ideation to profitability. And in the U.S. right now, not just at Quicken, but as a whole, Cold Form kind of feels this way, right? We still feel like we're on the very bottom of the S curve, or the very bottom prior to the upswing. I know we've seen a big uptick, but I still see that there is a huge opportunity, again, not just inside of a manufacturer, but on the dealer side, on the broker side, Cold Form in general. And, I always think about it every time I travel or fly, and you look down over pieces of land or any kind of city or area, you think about how many buildings are down there that could be or could have been cold form that just weren't cold form because of the time it didn't exist, or it wasn't prevalent, or people didn't have awareness around it. That's something I think about a lot. So that's one. Two, a lot, again, I mentioned for Quicken Cold Form is it's not an afterthought. It's really a main segment of the business. So a lot of the processes and the workflows at Quicken are designed around Cold Form. We haven't bolted it on and tried to shoe it in to another process that's applicable to components or applicable to roofing. You'll see everything from order confirmations to customer service claims to even the import process at Quicken from ag to our ERP is really tailored around Cold Form. It's always been a big focus. It continues to be a big focus. And then lastly, I think this goes for any manufacturer, not just Quicken, but the chance to maximize the value of the manufactured goods. We can run out what's considered a commodity product in the form of a roof purlin or a gird or whatever it may be, and we still do a lot of that. But on a per linear foot basis, if you're talking about the sum of the whole on a Cold Form, you may get 25-30% more margin sold as a building. And I try not to ignore that fact. Nobody really wants to talk about that because it's a little bit of taboo. But the fact of the matter is, when you're doing feasibility studies inside of your organization, or you're having to make a case around it, that's one of the main focal points. So we haven't ignored that either.
Quicken's gone beyond the ActiveEngine software to offer customers a more complete building product with your barndominium line. What sets that product apart from everybody else?
The biggest thing is that it's the full package. Not just the full package from what Quicken defines as a full package, but what the customer's looking for in a full package. Anyone can make a render. That's pretty common now. We see a lot of barndominium brokers or plan companies that make a render and post it on social. You can go on Fiverr and get a render for $20, or drop a floor plan or a schematic into ChatGPT and get a render for free in some cases. But we take it far beyond that, right? MEPs, parts list, floor plan that actually shows the intrusion of the columns, because we all know if we've designed a cold form building and ag and somebody gives you a stick built plan, you're always going to have columns where they don't belong or where the customer's not okay with those. We address that on the front end. And something for us that's really important is, are we being transactional about it, or are we being an advisor? And if you're being an advisor, either in a broker role or a manufacturer role as a sales rep, you want to help the client get to the end state that they want. And the client's end state in the form of a barndominium or a shop, it doesn't necessarily have to be a barndominium, is probably going to involve a walk door. It's probably going to involve a roll-up door, even if it's residential, and it's going to involve windows. So when a client comes to you and says, oh, a door would be cool in the side wall, a window would be cool in the end wall over here in bay one, we want to be able to offer them what they want. We don't want to stop at the 70-yard line and say, okay, here's some framed openings. Good luck at Home Depot. We want to be able to give you everything you want in one package. You don't have to take this, blindly put it in front of a contractor and say, can you do a takeoff? You don't have to do any of that, right? A render's great. but a render doesn't solve those problems for people. And what we wanted to do is solve those problems for people because, so often we're working inside of cold form buildings or working inside of residential buildings. And, we take for granted how much we know or how much to us is subconscious. And to the end client, they may only buy one building in their lifetime. If you're lucky, they're buying a few or buying several. But for a lot of people, they're only making that transaction one time. So they don't know what they don't know. And they don't have a reason to know how to take the next step. So we want to package up as much as we can for them and be the advisor and not just be transactional about selling a building that is on the 70-yard line and kind of leaving them out to dry for the remaining 30.
Yeah, I always say that there's a third-party industry that's going to start springing up around cold formed, and you'll see people who specialize in doing the barn dominium side, the residential side, and the plantings and stuff like that. And I'm already seeing actually some of the dealers for a number of different manufacturers who are doing the full turnkey, where they're doing, if you want a residential, they'll take the next steps to get it up to residential code. They'll do the full electrical, the plumbing, all the finishing and everything on the inside. So that's the nice thing about this business is it's whatever you make of it. But at the same time, the more that a manufacturer like a Quicken can offer, that makes it easier for other people to be able to offer that product and to be able to offer the full turnkey with the doors and the windows and everything.
And John, from an economic standpoint, again, it's a little bit of taboo, but just talking about the manufacturing side, you want to add in as many non-manufactured or third-party goods as you can because you do have room with the right supply agreements to add your markup to it and still supply it to the client at a fair price or a lower price than they could get it elsewhere. So it's a win-win. And then two, anytime you're selling a building, if you're comparing a 30 by 30 to a 30 by 30 to a 30 by 30, you start to get in a race to the bottom. But when you translate those dimensions into square footage and you consider it residential or you consider it flex space or leasable space or anything along those lines that you can tie metrics to, you can also just get more out of it. And that's not saying more just for Quicken, but that's saying you're making a case for the client and you're making a case for Quicken. So it's a win-win.
How does Quicken typically introduce cold form to a customer who's never heard of it?
So I'll address it in two ways. One being how are we first presented to a customer or prospect typically, and then two, how do we frame what we do to that customer? So the first being how we're introduced to the customer. That is usually through a social ad, which sparks interest from the customer. Typically, they're submitting a quote request because what they see in the ad aligns with something they're already looking for or something that they've already got, with another manufacturer, or that they're even considering a year, 2 year, 3 years down the line. But once they submit that quote request, the way that we address it to the client is here is what we do, because you can ask anyone on the team. I'll run through this with them. We need to show them what we do, and then we need to serve as the advisor. Again, key being advisor. We don't want to be transactional, and bridge the gap between what the client wants and what Quicken can offer. So we don't just go rattling off a list of specs or a list of dimensional qualities or any kind of features, because some customers just simply don't care about it. First, we have to agree on a need that the customer has. And a lot of time we find that the need is not to have G90 galvanized secondary or anything along those lines. The need is just they want an aesthetic barn dominium that looks this way and functions this way. And for us, the introduction outside of the ad is just bridging that gap.
What are some keys to closing a deal on cold form?
Let me answer this with a two-part answer, and I'll try not to get carried away or too salesy because this is kind of my niche, right? First, you need to be an honest advisor to the client. Everybody on the team hears it often. I just say first, be honest. People still transact on trust. And if a certain design element or certain layout isn't right for the client, tell them it's not right. You've got to build that trust by being an advisor rather than just agreeing with the client's every request in hopes of making a quick deal and being transactional. That ties into, when you think about it, in the general public's perception of a salesperson, that ties into how we would define a salesperson versus an advisor. At Quicken, we want to be an advisor. We don't want to be transactional. The transaction will happen if we're a good advisor. And that's something where, again, tying back into what I mentioned earlier, 9 times out of 10, you're working with a client who is only going to purchase this building or this type of building once in their life. I find that a lot of times clients who allow deals to go stale are too worried about being transactional. and not being the advisor. Second, I would say establish a commitment objective prior to each interaction with the client. Now, that sounds a little salesy, but I want to tie it back to the advisor theme versus being transactional. Far too often when these deals do go stale, it's because the rep allows conversations to just go on aimlessly. I see that a lot because, believe it or not, we get forwarded conversations from dealers or competitors or even internally, right, with somebody new. I think the client expects more out of somebody who they're going to transact with at this dollar amount. When you think about what that looks like, you see a lot of phrases from reps like, they attach a quote and say, check it out, or let me know, or here you go. And they add very little additional commentary to it. You don't want to write a book in your email outreach or any kind of outreach at all, but you are still expected to be the advisor. You want to enter a call or enter an email with a clear objective. And I find that a lot of deals get stuck because there is no clear path to a next step. And if there's not a clear path to the next step, there's definitely not a clear path to the finish line. Something we talk about internally and something I think about a lot is, how does the client know what to do next? Again, this client is not out buying a building a month. Nobody wakes up and decides, I just need a building to keep in my closet. They actually have a purpose around it. Sometimes it's a 2-3 year process, right? So they don't know what to do next. They don't know what they don't know. You're supposed to advise them, and your objectives should help lay a roadmap for that client to take the next step. It doesn't mean you're being slimy or pushy or introducing FOMO into the deal by saying price is good today only. That's not a commitment objective to get them to commit to the deal. It's actually the opposite. It looks something like, John, your color chips will arrive early Friday morning. Take the weekend to match these color chips I sent you against the existing structure you have on your property that you and I discussed. I know you had some concerns around color match, so this gives you time to compare the colors in different light and make sure you're happy with your choice. And once you've made a decision, how's Monday at 4 p.m. to finalize the color choices in your contract? Because when I say something and walk a client through the process, it not only instills confidence in the client that we're going to walk alongside them, but it also doesn't seem as transactional because it's not, right? We want the client to be happy. We don't want them to be resentful. And then ultimately, I know Monday at 4, we're going to finalize color choices in the contract. That's the stake in the ground. And I think a lot of conversations go stale and a lot of deals die in that process because it's just aimless wondering. The client is entitled to expect us to be educated and expert advisors, because if I'm going to write you a $50,000 check, John, I want you to know what you're talking about. I want you to tell me what the next step looks like. I want you to help walk me to the end. And then once the building is up and I'm happy with it and I'm not resentful about the color that I got rushed to choose, now I'm a raving fan.
How is Quicken looking to grow in the cold form space?
Our aim at Quicken is to remain cold form first. That doesn't mean that cold form currently is the bulk of our business. We'll continue to build out the component segments of the business across industries, but as we continue to refine our processes internally and plan ahead for the next 12, 24, 36 months, the direction is going to be set with cold form in mind. We feel that we have a good fire going. We just need to continue feeding that fire and strategically pouring a little more gasoline on it and expanding our network and expanding our team. Again, we run really lean. We don't have a team of 50 people in sales. We have a small, lean team that's just hyper-focused. And we want to continue to grow that at the right intervals. And then on top of that, we want to expand our product offering, whether it's manufactured goods or whether it's third-party goods as they relate to cold form buildings. And we want to continue offering a complete kit based on what clients are asking for.
How do you hope to see cold form grow in the next 5 years?
So cold form is an industry, of course, naturally, with all the metrics and all the machinery on order, the roll formers on order, the engagement across manufacturers, it's inevitable that it's going to grow. My hope is that on the Quicken side, in the next 5 years, we are 3x, maybe 4x the volume that we're currently doing in cold form, just because of our focus on cold form as a business segment. But what I hope to see, not only at the manufacturer level, but just in general, is more market awareness. That's probably number one. I'm sure you hear this across reps or across manufacturers that when someone submits a quote or you're doing cold outreach, whatever it may be, right? That prospect will still ask, is this red iron or is this tubular? They're not even aware that cold form as it exists through ACT is an option for their build. A lot of people, a lot of architects and a lot of engineers aren't aware of it. It's not being spec'd in projects that it could be. There's not a lot of creativity around it outside of with, the crew at ACT Dimensions and select manufacturers and just a handful of dealers. And just as a numbers game, you look at all of your red iron manufacturers, your welded frame companies that are out there, and how many are in each market, and how many architects, engineers, you name it, right, all the way down the list. How many are familiar with red iron and how to build around it or build with it? A lot of that is still lacking in cold form. So again, the market awareness portion, and I think the Cold Form Building Association is going to be a huge asset in that. That's something I'm pretty optimistic and excited about. It's going to help us all. We're all going to rise with the tide, and whoever is able to put out the best product offering and have the most awareness and service the customer the best is going to come out the best out of it. But ultimately, we're still a small portion of the market, and still not in front of a lot of prospects as manufacturers, as clients, as dealers, anything else.
Well, Hunter, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate you joining us and talking about Quicken Steel, talking about the future of the cold formed industry. We're excited to have Quicken to be a part of that and be part of the Cold Formed Steel Building Association as all that develops. For Lauren Toole, my name is John Cosper. We are the co-hosts of Cold Formed Buildings Made Easy. Thank you for joining us.